friendship, it, a couple different things, and examining why Christian friendships are so important in our walk with Christ. We're going to look at a couple different articles. And obviously, my conclusion is that Christian friendships do matter and they are important to our walk. But we're going to be looking at what kind of friendships we want to foster and why we should have those friendships and how throughout the scriptures we see this emphasized and Jesus models this for us and the apostles model this for us. So without further ado, let's go ahead and drop the intro. Let me pull it up here. All right. For those of you, this is your first time tuning in. This is the Vega Pod, inviting you to look at the issues through a biblical lens. All right, let me go ahead and share my slides and we'll dive right in. Christian friendship matters. Let me go ahead and remove this logo here so that you guys can see the full slide. All right. And let me flip back. Cool. Here we go. Social isolation has become the functional status of American life, and loneliness has made a profound and tragic impression on our mental health, physical well being, and community life. It's important to note that COVID is not the cause of this loneliness. It has only made it worse and exposed it. So this was already happening. COVID has just put more attention to it or drawn our attention more to this. The antidote to the COVID pandemic, social isolation and distancing, has exacerbated what the former Surgeon General called the epidemic of loneliness. Now, this former Surgeon General stated that loneliness is I guess I don't know if pandemic would be the right word. I guess it'd be like epidemic, but he stated this back in 2017. So this has been going on for a while. The pandemic has disproportionately hurt people of color, lower income individuals, and the elderly. Now, why is that, right? One reason is that lower income individuals are more likely to depend on family to watch their kids while they work. And when those family members are unable to, or it's no longer a safe option, those individuals are forced to take time off, sometimes without pay. Some employers aren't as understandable as others, and the result is that those individuals end up unemployed. Now, obviously, this doesn't apply to all families, right? Maybe lower income or people of color. But this is one of the reasons why it seems to affect people in that group. I would include myself in that category as well. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. All right. Americans already weak middle ring relationships, especially friendships, have been significantly diminished since March 2020, and they've mostly been replaced by screen time and faction friendships, which have pushed us to further polarization in the broader society as well as the church. Now, these middle ring relationships are the relationships, he says friendships, but I guess a lot of it from what I read in the article, and I'll include the links in the description. And this is going to be the one I believe it's going to be. It's going to have COVID-19 in the title. I can't think of it on the top of my head. Um, but the middle ring relationships are like short friendships, those kind of friendships that we cultivate, right? He mentions like the inner ring, which is kind of like our family members or spouses and our kids. The outer ring is more like your coworkers, people that you interact kind of like from a distant, not really, so not as close as inner ring, but not as distant as outer ring. It's kind of like that middle section of our relationships and our friendships. Um, all right. In 2020, the average American traded 300 hours of in person time with friends, church members, and neighbors for 300 hours of social media, TV, and internet reading. This is a problem. Now, a clear example of the first bullet point is what happened at the Capitol, right? These people were huddled up together, Facebook groups, and they were kind of feeding these ideas and these concepts, which led to them storming the Capitol. Another example was QAnon. Now, The second bullet point talks about how we traded 300 hours of in-person time for 300 hours of social media, TV, internet reading. Now, this is slightly different for those who have kids, but I would venture and say that's probably not by much. I think this has affected everyone, even those with kids, kind of in the same way. What has been lost in 21st century America, Dunkelman explains, are middle ring relationships. The friends we see regularly, our small group at church, a small team at work, our daily running group, and so on. Now, this in turn has left a void that is now being filled with unhealthy relationships. As David French says in one of his articles, you're either with us or against us. The fact these middle ring relationships have kind of disappeared, right? The friends we see regularly, or small group at church, people we go running with or exercise with, has left a void, which is being filled by a lot of these conspiracy groups, unfortunately, and other groups that aren't well intentioned. They don't really have your best interests in mind. They're more or less want to accomplish what they want to accomplish, and you're just a useful tool at that time. So, like he says, David French says in his articles, you're either with us or against us. In the spirit of disciplines, Dallas Willard wrote that the primary way by which we are conformed to Jesus, once we're united to him and regenerated, is by following him in the overall pattern of his earthly life. In the article, he goes on to talk about how Jesus modeled that for us: devotion to his friends, intentionally seeking those that weren't well liked, etc. On a different note, Dallas Willard, I've come across some of his stuff fairly recently. I've heard good things, just haven't really set a time to actually get into any of his, books or articles or any of his material. But on the U version, there's a plan, and I believe it's hearing God's word, or hearing through God's word. It's about 20 something days. I would strongly recommend it. It's very good, very insightful, and very helpful. It's based on his book that I believe shares the same title or a similar title. All right. So in that first article that mentions COVID-19 in the title, these are some the things that he highlights and how we can rebuild, or if we don't have them, build those middle ring relationships, right? His first one is show up and be consistent. Now, in the article, he's going to go more in depth. I just kind of grabbed a couple different things that stood out to me that I would wanted to emphasize in the video. So, number one, show up and be consistent. We must remember that we were created for community. We need one another. And without all sorts of friendships, we'll suffer personally and our churches will struggle. Number two, be the initiative taker and space creator. Open your lives and your homes to people, whether they're your regular friends or soon to be friends. Cultivate friendship outside your tribe. If all my friends look like me, have similar social status as me, or have the same educational background as me, then I haven't made much progress in adopting the overall way of life Jesus demonstrated. Number four, have patience. No one likes being mistreated or ruled out, but we all have people who are difficult for us to love. And if we're honest with ourselves, we are difficult people to love. So I want to mention a couple of verses here. The first bullet point talks about more or less showing hospitality, right? The Apostle Paul, Romans 12, verse 13, ESV, he says, contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. As believers, we should strive for opportunities or create opportunities where we can be hospitable. We should be aware of those who are in need, or, like he says here, just having people over, building that relationship, creating those friendships, right? Because as we'll see in a couple of the other slides, they help us out in the long run. The relationships, right? They're for our own good. And let me look at this next verse here. This is Colossians 3, verse 12. Put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Now, that last one for me, and it's the last bullet point as well, it talks about patience. And that's also a struggle for me. So if you're struggling with that, I understand. But that doesn't give us a pass. As Christians, we have to strive. We have to learn to be patient. And the way you learn to be patient is by being patient. I know, right? Great insight. All right. Christians should default to, now, this is the next article, and this is talking about how we should default to friendships or Christian friendships when we make certain decisions in our lives. And I'll include the link in the article as well. Um, um, the article link in the video. So his point here is how our Christian community or our church friendships should really be guiding us as we make these big decisions in our lives, and why it's not only helpful, but it's important for us spiritually. Christians should default to choosing where they lived based on Christian community. Now, one way to build or rebuild Christian friendships is by making an effort to live near your community, right? Fairly easy. Friendship is the most important but least discussed relationship in the church. This is all Kevin DeYoung. When our options seem wide open, we should default to the geography of Christian friendship. One of the greatest spiritual gifts we can give our children is relationships with other adults and children who walk with Jesus. Now, obviously, there are other things to consider when moving, and the article goes more in depth on that. So I would strongly recommend you look through both of the articles. But this second one is very helpful because I think a lot of times we think about our careers, we think about how much money we're going to make, we think about, oh, we're going to live in a really nice place, we're going to have a really nice house. But if you're distancing yourself from your church friendship, your church community, might not be good for you. You should really spend that time in prayer. And if you're not getting a clear or a direct answer from God on that specific topic, then evaluate your friendships, right? And those relationships that you have built, and think about, okay, if I move over here, what is that going to look like? Is there a church community near me? Is it a good church? How how am I going to fit in? How am I going to fit in? Is not the right word. How am I going to build or create community there, right? And get to, if you feel God is in you in that direction, then definitely take that step. But also make sure that you account for how important it is to build those friendships. Now, the point he's making, as he says this, right, consider um, to filter it through your church community, your Christian friendship, is that when everything else is going well, right, let Christian friendship be one of the things that guide you. Everything else is, on point, right? God is like, hey, I'm blessing you, I'm opening doors for you. Just make sure that you consider that as part of your decision making process. Acts 2, verses 42 to 44 in the ESV. Now I'm going to focus on how throughout the scriptures we see how church community and friendship is so important. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And all came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. This is Galatians 5, verse 2, ESV. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. 1 Thessalonians 5:11. Therefore, encourage one another and build one another up just as you are doing. It says Hebrews 3:13. But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. This is Hebrews 10:24 through 25. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. Christian friendships are important because Jesus modeled that for us, the apostles modeled that for us. But we are commanded to have these friendships and these communities, right? It's not optional for us. As believers, it's not optional. We need to have these friendships that we're building, that we're cultivating, that we're making space for. Throughout the gospel, Jesus placed a great level of emphasis on friendship. The apostle Paul continued this trend on his missionary journeys, as well as the other apostles. Friendships matter to God, therefore, they should matter to us. All right, let me flip back here. Cool. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. I want to keep the video a little short, so let me see if I can drop off here fairly quickly. But have a great Sunday. Have a blessed week, and I'll catch you guys next time.